Despite not being recognized by a single Western government, they now run the entire country. They control the borders. They control the natural resources. They decide who gets arrested and who walks free. And while the world argues over whether to call them a terrorist group or a state, they're building roads, signing deals, and quietly tightening their grip on 40 million people. Here's the million-dollar question. How does a regime with no international recognition, frozen central bank assets, and sanctions from half the world still manage to fund itself? This isn't the Taliban you think you know. This is the real game. To really understand the Taliban's power today, we need to rewind just a little. After 20 years, $2 trillion spent, and over 170,000 lives lost, the U.S. pulled out, and the Afghan government collapsed in a matter of days.
The Afghan government would fall to the Taliban.
Spent 20 years watching the Taliban.
Because it was like a house built on sand. The whole system, police, army, economy, was being held up by money and support from other countries. Now, while all of that was happening, the Taliban wasn't gone. They were just being very quiet. For years, they stayed mostly in the background. Not just fighting in the mountains, but doing something smarter. They started acting like a government, especially in rural areas where the real government barely showed up. They collected taxes. They settled arguments. They even helped people with land problems. In some places, people trusted them more than the corrupt local officials. The Taliban weren't just rebels anymore. They were building something like a shadow government. They didn't come in guns blazing. They came in as an alternative to corruption, to chaos, to a government that, in many places, simply didn't exist. Once they took Kabul, there were no liberation speeches, no grand new vision. Instead, they did something no one expected. They started acting like a government. They held press conferences, promised amnesty. They knew if they were ever going to be taken seriously on the world stage, they had to look like a government, even if they didn't change much beneath the surface. After the fall of Kabul in 2021, most of the world expected the Taliban to collapse under its own weight. Instead of collapsing under pressure, they turned to internal revenues. The Taliban expanded taxation on everything from agricultural output, mining operations, and transport routes to cell phone services and even customs at border crossings. Even though no country officially recognizes the Taliban as a legitimate government, neighboring countries still trade with them because business doesn't wait for politics. So, trucks filled with goods cross into Afghanistan every single day, from Iran, Pakistan, Central Asia, and they pay import taxes to the Taliban at border checkpoints. Then there's mining. Afghanistan is sitting on an estimated $1 trillion worth of minerals: copper, lithium, iron ore, rare earth elements, and the Taliban knew it. They struck deals with local warlords, tribal leaders, and even some foreign investors to keep the mines running. Even though Western aid stopped, humanitarian organizations still operate inside Afghanistan. Groups like the UN and Red Crescent bring in food, medicine, and cash to help ordinary people. All of that passes through Taliban-controlled checkpoints, so while the Taliban don't touch that aid directly, they still benefit from the infrastructure built around it. Think logistics contracts, bank service fees, and even rent for buildings used by NGOs. And just to make it even more surreal, there are reports that Taliban officials are being trained in finance and governance by foreign NGOs. The same international institutions that don't recognize the Taliban are, in some cases, helping them govern better. The Taliban leadership knows they can't survive on ideology alone. They've studied what happened to isolated regimes like North Korea. So instead, they've started carving out relationships with regional powers, not for approval, but for survival. And the first country in line? China. China is desperate for lithium and rare earth minerals to fuel its tech economy. In exchange for access to these resources, the Taliban has offered China two things it cares deeply about: security promises that no anti-China terror groups will operate out of Afghanistan, and a green light for Chinese firms to quietly begin negotiating mining deals. Chinese companies have already visited Kabul. Trade agreements have been discussed. There are whispers that the Taliban might join China's massive Belt and Road Initiative, a global infrastructure project that stretches across 3 continents. And this isn't just about trade, it's about legitimacy. Because even if Western nations refuse to recognize the Taliban, deals with China give them economic recognition. But China isn't the only one getting a seat at the table. Russia has also warmed up to the Taliban, not because they love them, but because they need them. As Russia becomes more isolated from the West due to its war in Ukraine, it's actively courting anti-Western partners to expand its influence. Russia has hosted Taliban delegations, opened up trade discussions, and even welcomed Taliban diplomats to regional summits. Meanwhile, Iran is playing a much more complicated game. Iran needs border security and access to Afghan water. The Taliban needs oil, trade, and a backdoor into global markets, so they've struck a cold, transactional relationship, one that's full of tension, but also utility. Even Turkey and Qatar have begun playing the long game with the Taliban. Turkey wants to position itself as a mediator in the Muslim world. Qatar already hosts Taliban offices and is acting as a key diplomatic bridge. Both countries know the Taliban isn't going away, and being early in the door could mean enormous influence later. The Taliban isn't just surviving international pressure, it's weaponizing it. They've started making strategic moves to show the world, you need us more than we need you. They're offering counterterrorism cooperation in exchange for sanctions relief. They're dangling mineral access in front of powers hungry for resources. And behind every handshake, every photo op, every back-channel negotiation lies the same brutal authoritarian machine that governed Afghanistan with fear and religious extremism. Only now, it wears a suit instead of a rifle. The Taliban has figured out that in the 21st century, you don't need to be liked, you just need to be useful. And if you're useful enough, the world will eventually stop asking questions. Behind closed doors, deals are being signed, minerals are being shipped, and foreign dollars are flowing in. This is no longer the Taliban of caves and AK-47s. This is a government, brutal, illegal, unrecognized, but terrifyingly effective at playing the long game. And the scariest part? They're not hiding anymore. They're just learning how to play our game better than we do.